Greetings, Dr. Charlie Brown here. This message literally woke me up out of my sleep. So I'm just following that lead. You, you being your full self is the evolution. A good sister friend, priestess of mine, she hates rewords. Revolution, whatever. She doesn't like the redoing of something, the re-evolving of something. So I'm taking her lead on that and calling this the evolution. And really, you and your fullness is how we evolve. You perhaps not looking the other way when the uncomfortable feelings arise and sitting with them. That's how we evolve. You surviving as a black woman, my mere existence is how we evolve. Being the fullness of my being, as multifaceted as she is how we evolve. You too. The point of evolution, the point of coming to a greater awareness, of flowing in what seems unflowable, is that you bring your full self in all of your complexity, in all of my complexity. I must show up fully. I must be every aspect of myself at some point. For many black people, but more specifically black women, wearing our hair in its natural form, the way it grows out of our head, is an act of evolution, is an act of us evolving into a more a more robust place. It is us refusing to say no. It is us speaking up where we would have been silent. It is everything that we do that brings the fullness of ourselves. Sometimes it's rest. Audre Lorde talks about rest, an act of self-care, being really the most defiant thing you can do as a black woman. It is calling on your ancestors. Understand that you are an unbroken chain of humanity. When I was in graduate school, one of my professors suggested that, and we thought about it. None of us had ever thought about that before. Literally, you are an unbroken chain of humanity. You had to have ancestors who decided to carry on long enough to have a child, unbroken to the first humans. Whatever that was, however that looks, you are an unbroken chain back to that ancestor, back to those ancestors. Your mere act of survival is the evolution. Some people are protesting, some people are writing letters, some people are calling, making phone calls, some people are voting, some people are agitating, some people are calming, being the voices that other people can hear, being the ears that listen. All of these are evolutionary acts by you simply showing up as your full self in any given moment, by you allowing other aspects of yourself maybe into work. Maybe that's still not safe and you do it anyway. I remember in graduate school, as my school was collapsing, I think I talked about this elsewhere, but I know that I was having technical difficulties that day. I don't know if that made it to the video. I wrote a letter, and I was my school's equivalent of the student body president at the time. My school was collapsing. I count 2 coups, but that might be debatable. And I wrote a letter. I was wrong about the outcome, and if the circumstances were the same, I would have still written that letter. I understood what I was doing. I understood fully what I was doing. And I wrote the letter, and the letter basically said, I thought I had been dealing with monsters, and I realized that I had been dealing with humans who cared very deeply about what was happening and where we were going, and that the very unpopular decision that was being made in that current moment, that I did think it was coming from the best interest of the people who were charged with making that decision. There were a whole lot of things wrong with it. It was done very poorly. It was handled very poorly. And in my letter, I said, I think we should move forward. I think that we can't go back to what was, and what wasn't working. And I'm in a similar moment right now that obviously, maybe it's not so obvious to you. It's been obvious to me for a while, and I can see that in my writing, um, which is of course a de facto uh, marker of the moment, even when the moment has passed. And now, with everything social media, you can't get rid of anything. You can't have a feeling one day and it never returns. It'll return year after year after year on the same date. It's actually counterproductive in some ways that it keeps repeating, because it makes it more challenging to move forward. And I do think that forward is where we need to move. And so what that means is you perhaps examining yourself. What woke me was the thought of a couple of things. In the movie Queen and Slim, when the young man, he talks to the two main characters, and then he goes and he thinks his part is to go take this handgun that he has, and his act of defiance was to shoot the cop in the face. I am in no way proposing or endorsing that. It is the feeling behind being your full self and being in the flow of doing the difficult thing. Again, I'm not actually promoting violence. I'm sitting with a lot of anger. And I can notice that even in my anger, I'm not at the place of rage I was a couple of weeks ago. And even in my anger, I'm not necessarily interested in harming anyone or anything. How do I sit with this anger, which can be very destructive, and figure out a way? And I'm figuring it out, kind of step by step, piece by piece, and sitting with it, hard with it. Um, it also reminded me of another situation where, in a singing something, we were doing a performance, and it was kind of the dress rehearsal for the performance, but our leader was not there. She had asked me specifically to kind of take the lead in that moment, and another person deemed himself, and let me tell you, it's almost always a him who deems himself sort of the most important person in the situation, the most experienced person in the situation. That's a whole other discussion. That's a whole 75,000 other discussions about men and their senses of entitlement and purpose and taking up space. In this particular story, he assumed, since the leader wasn't there, that he would take the lead, when again she had asked me specifically. Now, that wasn't communicated to the whole group, so he and I were absolutely in consternation with each other. When she called me to check in how it went, I explained everything that happened, but of course in such a way that would have positioned me, at least in my head, as the rightest. And she didn't take my side, which I appreciate in hindsight. She said it sounds like there was some difficulty. And it sounds like maybe y'all worked it out. Maybe it wasn't, in the best way it could have been worked out, but it sounds like y'all worked it out. Now, the surprising element was a different man who was actually, I believe, a friend of the first man. They were at least associated with each other. And he surprised me. He, in kind of our practice sessions, our regular practice sessions, he did not have a particularly contrary personality. And he said, Listen, y'all both right, y'all both wrong, but we need to get through this and we need to find a way through this. And I was like, let me find out. You showed up for this party. And that's what we need. We need you to show up. We need you to show up in the ways that make sense to you. And maybe they are difficult ways that you've never shown up before. One thing that also happens when I work early in the mornings, and I'm not generally accustomed to working early in the mornings, my brain goes into hyperdrive. So that's actually what happened here today, too. That as I am getting older, it takes me longer to adjust to new things. Like a really long time. It used to take me like 3 weeks. It used to take me 3 days to adjust to a new schedule. And then it was 3 weeks. And now it's a really long time. So this is a second early morning in a row. And instead of being up at 6, it's like 4:15. And my body's like, we're going to be hypervigilant. Okay, body, it would also be wonderful if you rested, if you slept for a reasonable amount of hours. And so, what's your new thing? What's the thing that helps us evolve? Is it having a difficult conversation with a relative? Is it sitting with your anger and sitting with it until something arises that isn't harm? And again, I kind of was surprised that I wasn't really interested in harming anything. The rage of a couple weeks ago, I was ready to burn everything down. And as that thought comes, it's sort of an impulse thought and not an actual thought. And so making that distinction for me to say that my anger isn't violent. My anger isn't wishing harm on someone. It is wishing that people weren't so selfish. People weren't acting like this is their own personal evolution that doesn't affect anybody else, because it affects everybody else. And I have had the something of being able to be selfish for a very, very, very long time. To being able to close my eyes. I am a light-skinned black woman with long hair, relatively speaking. And that affords me privilege and permission to move in spaces that, for instance, darker skinned women with different hair than me can move in this world right now, because of the sort of infatuation with aspects of my particular being that make it easier, so people think, for them to hear me. What that also means is that part of my work is as a bridge builder. Is if people can hear me, I have learned to be responsible about that. I wasn't always responsible about that. I remember in college I used to say whatever came to mind. I used to say whatever out of my mouth just because I could. And as I have evolved at my own personal level, I am very clear that I can't say anything out of my mouth. That people hear me, that people listen to me, and take what I say as truth. Truth is absolutely one of my gifts, and so I also have to be responsible with and for that truth. So I understand my work. I understand that pieces of my work are in spaces where I can be where others can't be. That's part of your work too. What spaces are you in that others can't be in? You need to use your voice, you need to use your presence, you need to use your body and your ideas there, even when it's uncomfortable. Probably especially when it's uncomfortable. And sit in that. Sit in these difficult conversations. Build this bridge to understanding. These things that you haven't had to understand just because you could. This is in particular to white folks. You got a lot of understanding to do, and you need to get that it's not anyone's responsibility but your own. Don't ask anybody else to do your emotional labor or any sort of your labor, your physical labor, none of it. Don't. Of course, there's memes because we have social media now, and they're pretty funny. But don't ask other people to do your work. This is your work. I believe that we all choose to come into existence in just the way, just the place, just the time that we come into existence. So why did you choose to come into existence at this time? What is your piece of the work? understand no one is asking you to do all of the work. We're simply asking you to do your piece. When we all do our piece, when we all are true to ourselves, even when that is difficult, that's how we evolve as a species, as a person, as a collective, as a person who belongs with and for and to other people. This is how we evolve. All of this woke me up. This is why I couldn't sleep. So now you get just 4 a.m. raw, filtered. I'm absolutely in my PJs and tired. I still would love to go to sleep for an hour and a half, and we'll see. I'll pretend to go to back to sleep. This is what we need though. We need, if these thoughts wake you up out of your sleep, then you need to say them. You need to share them, just as I'm doing now. We need you to do your part. If you are a white person looking for what you can do your work and talk to other white people, because that's who white folks listen to, is other white folks. You can put yourselves, your bodies, your intellectual property, you can put all of that on the line. Black people have been asked to do that for far, far too long. And clearly, what is it netting us? Because we keep getting killed as unarmed people, as unarmed citizens. Citizen is an iffy word. When white folks use citizens, it's usually some sort of militia group. So that's your part. Your part is to do the thing that's difficult because it's arising. It's the not looking the other way, perhaps for the first time in your life, and sitting with it and parsing through it. And yes, get support when you need it. I'm a huge advocate for support, including therapy. I'm a very strong advocate for therapy, and I was very, very black woman resistant to it before I went through it. And it is the best. Good therapy with a good therapist that suits you, that works for you. Maybe it's trying something new, but really not looking the other way. Can you face all of this difficulty head on, full frontal, looking dead at the camera in this case? This is how my brain works. This is maybe why I'm so tired often. Because this woke me up at 4 o'clock this morning, which is now about 4:30, I guess, at this point. Because I resisted it. I resisted it for like 15 minutes because I really wanted to go back to sleep. There's a Rumi poem that talks about don't go back to sleep. And take that at the metaphorical level and do your work. We really need you specifically to do the thing that is evolutionary for you to do. We really need you to be the best and fullest version of yourself in this moment, and then again in the next moment, and the moment after that, and the moment after that. Whew. That's what I have for you right this moment. This will probably get posted at a later point because, again, Alive was not working super well. I am Dr. Charli Brown, and I want you to take great care.